Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Deep Thoughts. Today, I am going to take a crack at a reality known as biophotons. For those of you wondering what that is, there are essentially two schools of research. And this happened when I did Multiverse too, because when you have this is actually less theoretical than Multiverse. When you have some of these theoretical or emerging sciences, you have schools of thought that move in from different universities, from different whatever institutions, and they kind of go in different directions based on their charter, and so they will claim ownership over a particular term and a particular concept, right? So with Multiverse, I forgot that there are so many theories about multiversing based on so many different approaches that it got confusing for some folks. So the study of biophotons by itself as a pure research project is to merely look at the photoelectric emissions from human cells or organic cells in plants and insects. You know, there's things in the bottom of the ocean that glow. There's lightning bugs that have butts that glow, right? But those are, the fish at the bottom of the ocean and lightning bugs you can see with your own two eyes. The bioelectric signatures that we get out of all living tissue, and it's living tissue, not your steel desk, right? So it's very interesting where we're going with this. Then there's biophotonics, which is the study of whether or not sunlight plays a direct role in healing the body and nourishing the body. Now let me just throw a real quick concept at you. That isn't it interesting how we typically are pretty healthy in the summertime, and as soon as winter rolls around, we get sick. Now, today there's a lot of factors in that. Today we have planes that spray stuff in the sky, which always coincides with mass illness in your area. Like I said in a really old episode, I have two ways of measuring this. It'll get cold. It'll be cold for a month. They used to let it get cold for about a month before they'd start spraying. But when I had 2 offices and about 30 employees from my game company, they would spray. My entire company would be healthy, and they'd spray really bad here in Orange County and LA. And I do a trek back and forth once a week at least. And I'd tell the employees, I'd say, hunker down on your vitamin C, your zinc, get good sleep, because it's coming. You just got sprayed. And they laugh. And then everyone would get sick. As well as that example, and actually hearing it from urgent care doctors that said, yeah, there's a really bizarre spike in everyone getting sick all of a sudden. And then I told the doctor to start looking at planes that spray in the sky, and you could see this guy do a 60,000 foot stare because it's somehow he had been looking at it and didn't know the correlation. It's really funny. But I have some friends of mine up in LA who are in the film business. They're very eclectic people. They don't get out much. They don't shake hands, and they would get sick as well. And everyone had an upper respiratory problem, and the less that people took vitamins like powdered time-release vitamin C, it would go from their nose to their throat to their chest. And then when it sat in the chest, it would go 1 to 3 months. And when I found out the trick of C, I just stopped it in its tracks. Unbelievable. But think about it. The days get shorter, don't they? Daylight savings time. There's no goddamn reason in the world why that should still be out there, but it is. putting us in further darkness. So when we come home, there's nothing left. Now, the days get pretty darn short up until the winter solstice. So it's kind of hard to evade some of that. But I wanted to loop around this theory, okay, because you've pretty much heard the basic theory, which is, hey, everything that's alive seems to emit light on one frequency or another, right? And, what I always say on this show is to remind you that in the ethereal fabric of the universe, light is nothing more than a verbal reaction. It is like the ripple in the pond. If I sent you out there into the pond and I skipped a bunch of rocks and I said, bring back the ripples to me, you would look at me like I'm crazy. That's the exact same thing if I say, bring back the photons to me. But you have one trick you can do in this reality for us, which is to bring me a torch that has non-verbal ether particles stuck in these vortexal loops that give them their designation as atoms that are thermalizing and becoming light. Now, depending on how nerdy you are with this show, and I commend you if you are, you will have heard me mention probably half a dozen times that the gentleman who built Coral Castle in Florida, for those of you who don't know, the one-sentence synopsis is a 110-pound man built probably, if you total up all the coral rock that he used to build this castle, but he wrote a paper on magnetism that you can download online. And it says that we have all been duped about the construction of an atom, and that at the center of an atom is a photon. Now, here's what's wild about that for me. The volumes and volumes of books and classes I've taken and research that I've done in every derivation of physics, no one's ever said that in my travels. I watched all of Eric Dollard's stuff, one of the most amazing men who has resurrected the old documents from Faraday to Tesla to Steinmetz, and I didn't hear him say that. Fascinating. Now, why the Coral Castle guy said that, we are still speculating. These guys that seem to create these amazing things, for whatever reason, covet. They hide their information. He was brilliant and left behind what we believe to be an amazing roadmap as to how he built the place, with quadratic prime numbers and all kinds of wild stuff that contributed to his magnetic wheel in his warehouse generating pretty much as much electricity as he needed to move these rocks, as well as the rocks themselves definitely being hooked up to pulleys and stuff. But these rocks were so absolutely heavy that a lot of us are convinced that the pictures that we see of the pulley system based on three probably 10 by 10 tree trunks were not strong enough to lift some of the rocks that he had because they were so massive. Plus, he always had an electrical box on the top and wires coming down. And I believe in my sacred geometry episode, I explained why I think what I think he was doing. But he only worked at night, and he said that when asked, why did you work at night to build your castle, he said, well, one, it's a natural cover from prying eyes, and two, it's because the sun fights my technique of moving these rocks, which is very interesting. Now, I'm going to go down just some theoretical things. I'm going to talk in some speculative, conspiratorial speech. I'm not trying to create any panic in anyone, but I think that if you were to listen to this and heed the ideas and test them out for yourself, you could find out whether or not there's any truth to this for yourself. I think the sun is a healing, beautiful thing. I think that when I get sun on my face doing these shows for you guys, I'm also being healed. And I don't mean that in some magical way, that I've got some tumor hanging off the front of my face and it disappears. I just think my pineal gland fires, my vitamin D happens, we're all deficient in vitamin D, and that's just the beginning. But the more I spend time in the sun, the more I feel one with the earth, and I feel much more patient with humanity. And some people could say it's because it's heating you up. It's heating up your bloodstream. You're getting calmed down because you're overheated. You need to radiate. Maybe that's why it's so good. But there's been a string of videos published fairly recently in my research of just bumping into things that they're basically saying, look at how many attempts are made to block the sun from your body. The chemtrails. Well, what's interesting about the chemtrails is, except for like 4th of July in America, where they spray because everyone's outside barbecuing, in the summertime in America, they really don't spray that much. In the wintertime, they go absolutely crazy. But they're obstructing the sun with that stuff a little bit, right? Now, for my money, I don't know how efficient that is. I actually think that it would be fairly inefficient to block the, quadrillions of photons that hit us every second. I think putting a particulate in the air is probably the number one reason why it would make you sick, right? Again, there's evidence of, fibers and all kinds of stuff dropping out of these things as well. But honestly, if you're just ingesting a particulate, you are not healthy because your immune system is taxed and you will catch whatever's going around. So, but back to photons. When I was a kid in the 70s, sunscreen wasn't around really. You put on cocoa butter and you put on lotions that were oils to make you tan better. To, I guess, change the frequency such that you tan browner. It seems, I have a buddy of mine, he's a rocker. When we go to Havasu, he puts on the oil. He doesn't put any block on. And he fares better every single time. And I'll put the block on and I look like some bizarre spray paint accident by the end of the day. There's all the studies that say that once the sun hits a sunblock, it turns toxic. And so you're basically toxifying your entire epidermis, absorbing all these chemicals. Go figure. When I was a kid, I never ever heard about skin disease. The dermatology starts to explode in the late 70s, early 80s. Girlfriends started going to it, family members started going to it, and what was sick about it was they were so excited that someone told them they had a cancerous cell on their face. It was Munchausen disease, right? It was hypochondriacs just loving the procedures and the acid baths on their face and taking a mole off here and this over there. Now it's an epidemic, right? As a footnote, it seems like the late 70s was the era in which health became marginalized through medical advice, through super bad medical advice. For instance, by the early 80s, they were telling all the people of the world to stop eating the yolk in an egg. About 5 years later, Alzheimer's comes on the scene like an epidemic. Well, the cholesterol that's in the yolk of an egg is exactly the cholesterol a human being is supposed to be ingesting. It also supports the cholesterol in which the brain is made out of. I've heard numbers like 76% of the gray matter in your brain is made from the exact same cholesterol you find in an egg, in the yolk of an egg. And when you don't ingest good cholesterol, the cholesterol that is your brain, that's holding the neurons apart, keeping them spaced out so the wires don't touch each other and short out, that the sponge disappears and all the wires start connecting. And then the phone call that's supposed to go, from your brain to your toe gets diverted to your left hand. And when you're trying to create cognitive thought, you're just totally confused about where you are, who you are, and when you are. Until eventually the neural tangling, as they call it, gets so severe that your organs begin to fail because they no longer can sort out what they're supposed to do because they keep getting erroneous messages from the brain. Now, organs function by themselves, but when they are bombarded with electricity from random sources, they don't function well. But the reason why I'm jumping on this episode now is that this guy from Coral Castle, I forgot his name, it's a name it's hard to pronounce, his little paper that said there's a photon at the center of an atom from a guy that built Coral Castle, I have not been able to shake that. But if you take my theory about a photon being a verb and not a noun, then that's very interesting. What's that mean? How do you hold a verb in the center of an atom? That would mean that there's an outer shell, an outer casing, that is somehow causing the verbal reaction in the center, most likely. And that's the relationship. Somehow there's a force pushing in from the ethereal winds, and then there's this little turbulent little vortex going on in the center. Now, before I go too much further down that line, there's something called the Einstein-Rosen bridge, and they mentioned it in Thor Ragnarok, which was absolutely hilarious. This is the theory that there are two dimensions, or at least a fold in the dimension that you're in. Now take a plane and think of that as one reality, and take a plane underneath, like two cloths, right, or whatever, and then you cut this hole between them, so there's like this funnel between them. The movie Pacific Rim also used this sort of theory in the way that the monsters were coming out of the bottom of the ocean. That is a theory on a piece of paper, okay? But when we think about the cyclical nature of energy in the universe, we have to think about it like, if everything is in motion, then it has to have this path, right? For those of you who study the fire rim in the Pacific, right? This lava rim that goes around the plates, or whatever, not the plates, but the continents of the world in the Pacific Ocean, you'll be familiar with the fact that if you were to take a piece of lava and be able to stick a flag in it, and it moved, it would go all the way around and come back to you, having traveled to Hawaii and Japan and Alaska and back to you in California, let's just say. So whether or not energy can be trapped in its ultimate form, I'm not sure. When I did my episode on gravity, I introduced an idea that I think is I've used it several times since I came up with it for the episode, which is, when I point at a current, those little vortexes in, say, a stream, in a river, or maybe it hits the support beam of a bridge, and I say, hey, do you know what that is? And you say, oh, that's a vortex, that's a current. And I can say to you, no, it's just water. But because it behaved like it did, you gave it the designation of a current or a vortex. And so it could be that what we see in the universe is merely the latest ripple, the latest design in its path of constantly renewing energy. Okay? For any of you who've played pinball, there are places in the pinball game where the ball moves really, really slow, because it's just kind of floating around the playing field. And then there's areas where there's a little spiral staircase in it, and it goes really fast, right? It changes levels or does whatever it does, right? Without a kicker. So imagine ethereal particles being that, and the only thing that you can see is the path. So you see the pinball machine more than you see the ball. Hope that makes sense. But now think about what we said in the multiverse episode about the information wave of the universe. The fact that we have proof that we have an information wave. If you've ever had information fall into your lap, right? And I gave several examples in that episode I won't repeat. The fact that things burn is very interesting, right? It can burn for all kinds of reasons. Once it thermalizes and turns into a flame, a couple of things happen, right? Say you take a bunch of newspaper and you light it on fire. And you have that brief moment where it thermalizes into fire and flames. And then what's left? You have this carbon kind of skeleton of the newspaper, and it gets blown by the wind, or you can put your hand through it. So it looks like carbon was left behind, and a bunch of the inner components of what that carbon was, initially, the newspaper, vaporized into the galaxy, right? Well, what if that chain reaction is nothing more than the undoing of the photonic energy that's inside of an atom, and it's simply releasing. Now, you might think, yeah, dude, that makes complete sense. All right. But what if I say you're made of the same stuff? And so you have a tremendous amount of photons in you. You are a collection of photons, but they are encased in non-illuminating suitcases until we use the biophotonic camera techniques of these really sensitive cameras to film you. And then all of a sudden you start glowing. Now, some of you have seen these photographs. And what's interesting about it is the subjects that are filmed, and some of the most beautiful ones I've seen are plants. I'll try to find some photographs for the YouTube video. But what's interesting is it becomes apparent that the body of whatever you're filming for this experiment is not translucent. It's opaque. You can't see through it. And so the only thing you're seeing is a bit of the emissions off of the surface of whatever is organic. And where there is a fold in the tissue, like for a human being it might be your eyelid or your armpit or something in your nose, it becomes brighter because it seems as if when there's a fold that it exposes more of exposes multiple layers of the cellular tissue. Like if you take a carpet and a piece of carpet and you fold it in half, the fibers at the top, you can start seeing the little stitching down there that the fibers are attached to. Well, just imagine there's more fibers down there instead of stitching. So you'd be seeing more photons escaping the cloth that is us. But now let's go back to this notion that a photon is a verb. And then let's study the most fundamental definition of what is life. I usually don't think of my coffee table over here that I used to have inside my house that's outside the house now painted green. I don't think of that thing as being alive. Even though it's made of wood and that wood used to be alive. I don't think of it as being alive anymore. It's been cut off from its water supply for almost 2 decades. Who knows how long the wood sat before they built this thing. But when you play 20 questions and you want to find out if something is organic or a fundamental mineral like steel or gold or something, we think of it as one of them is alive and one of them isn't. But what is the definition of life, if not a verb? It is mass that has consciousness, right? Life is what we call the illusion of consciousness. I'm pretty sure you had a thought this morning that you're no longer thinking. Depending on when you're seeing this video, you've had thoughts all day long. They come and they go, right? You are sort of this conduit for consciousness, for thoughts. Remember our pinball machine idea? You're the pinball machine. I'm the pinball machine. And the ball that's going through could just simply be the verb of a thought. The illusion that we call consciousness, the illusion that we call life, is a verb. So isn't it ironic that when we do this biophoton photography, right? Life gives off light, but inanimate objects, depending on when they're created, if you built a sofa out of a bunch of ferns that you harvested that day, it'd probably glow like crazy. But as long as the sofa is 100 years old, it's not going to give off any of these photonic signatures because it's no longer alive, no matter what it's made out of. A lot of us sit around in the universe and we struggle to figure out, what the hell are we? It's just that basic thing of when you crawl out of all your paradigms and your religions and your politics and you just come back to humanity, you're trying to figure out what you're made out of. Lately, for me, I almost feel silly being a human being. It's funny. I like being alive as a human being, don't get me wrong. But I feel like every time I make an episode with you guys, every time I read your comments, every time I have a time to kind of summarize it all and aggregate data, I feel more and more like a soul. And I feel like what I am doing is I'm in this ritual of veneering my soul. I have this body that was given to me by my parents. Millions of decisions were made to make this body look exactly the way you see it today. Yours the same, right? We're born in a certain place and time. We have certain opportunities, certain privileges, and certain disadvantages. You could start out in a privileged realm and end up in a disadvantaged realm, and vice versa. You build your character, then your personality, your persona, on top of that, as Freud would say. And then we live this life, and we choose careers. But in its core form, you live inside your head. That's what's really going on, right? The reason I mention this is that if you're like me, you're sort of looking for that Disneyland map that is the kind of caricature of the park, you know? But what you want it to be is the caricature of all of the universe and what it is, including you inside that map. You know, you're just like the big, where the castle is at the Disneyland map, it's you. And everything that's floating around you is your family, your friends, your consciousness, your subconsciousness, the layer that explains what you're built out of. This idea that photons are a super component of reality is very, very interesting. If we ever stopped metabolizing, they usually call us dead, right? They feel for the pulse, and the pulse is gone. That soul has left this vessel and is off someplace else. Okay. So anything that churns mass, anything that contributes to the verb of movement that is organic life, well, that might just end up being the carrier wave for a lot more than just a mechanical gas tank to keep the body going. A lot of you, like me, you struggle with the notion of God. And not that God exists or doesn't exist. Some of you have that issue. That's fine. It means you're alive and you're thinking. If you're not struggling anymore and you think he doesn't exist, that's one religion. And if you don't struggle anymore and you think he does exist, that's another religion, right? Another belief system. But man has created all kinds of stories to explain this sort of spiritual endowment from your creator. And there seems to be this difference of living a life not acknowledging a creator and living a life where you do acknowledge a creator. And for those of you who are atheists, I would have a lot more understanding if you had at least experienced some sort of what you might call spiritual enlightenment or an epiphany before choosing to be an atheist. But if you've never done it, you might try it. Or you might be actually experiencing it, but you just simply have a different name for it. For any of you that have had intuition, and I mean huge intuition, something either said, go, 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 or something said, get out of here as fast as you possibly can. This is bad. And more than can be explained by sort of environmental input. There was a famous event that happened in Wichita, Kansas when I was a kid. I think if you look up Wichita, Kansas Hell's Angel Park riot, you will find a moment in time that was even filmed by the local news stations, and I was there that day as a child. My mom and I lived in a little town called Derby, south of Wichita. And for whatever reason that day, she just said, let's get out of the house. Let's go to the park. And we never did that. I did my thing. She did her thing. I wasn't really a park kind of guy. You know, I was like, give me my motorcycle. Get out of my way. But that day we drove into the city. We went to this park. It's this peaceful thing that's going on and people just chilling out. And I think that there was some event that later that evening or something, but all these Hells Angels start to show up. And there was a bunch of parking problems because of some event that was happening. I don't think we were trying to stay for the event. I don't think we even knew the event was going to occur, if I remember right. But my mom looked around and saw all this kind of compression of people and said, let's get out of here. And no sooner did we get out of that place than a full-on brutal brawl happened between the citizens who were there fighting these bikers, and then the Kansas Highway Patrol showed up. And if you've never seen a Kansas Highway Patrolman, which I'm pretty sure it was the Highway Patrol, even though it was city district, they are next to Marines, okay? If you get pulled over by a Kansas City Highway Patrol guy, you'll know what I'm talking about. These dudes are some of the most tightest dressed police officers in this country. And well, at least it used to be that way when I was a kid. Maybe they all weigh 400 pounds now, but I haven't seen that. I give that example just to kind of set that aside. Those things can kind of just be logic problems of going, yeah, this doesn't look right. But I'm willing to bet if you're 30 years old, you've had at least one moment where it almost felt like a voice was talking to you, giving you good advice either way. Get involved, get out. It suggests this carrier wave of information. In this new awakening that's happening online, I would say due to being online, okay? A lot of us can feel it. We can feel the fact that subject matters are coming up on two sides of the globe before the two sides have a chance to observe each other. And then what we do is we end up observing each other and finding out the historical record that 2 weeks ago, a month ago, a year ago, a bunch of us got on the same track for whatever reason. And the interesting thing is we get on these tracks without any real help. Now, we know that there's disinformation campaigns out there that get us off on crazy things. I won't demonize any one theory, but there's plenty of them out there, right? But given how much is still coveted and hidden, how much the press doesn't report on things that they should be reporting on, there's a lot of hive minding going on way outside the fabric of anything being input from YouTube or fringy websites, right? But let's look at the fundamental principles of this little furnace in the inside of perhaps all atoms, and therefore inside biomatter that can use it for something other than just sheer existence. Because what I've said is sort of a paradox, right? I've told you that there's this biophoton theory that we give off light. That's one set of experiments. There's another theory that talks about it giving healing energy. I just watched a documentary on Netflix where a guy didn't eat for like 55 days and just drank water. And he didn't die. He was fine. He went through a lot of pain. And he said that the world record was 50 some days, and he tried to break the world record in his little adventure. He didn't contact Guinness Book of World Records or anything, but there are videos online of gurus in India who claim to have not eaten for over, I think the guy's up to 3 decades now. And he says he just eats from the sun. Now, no one's there to verify this, but the dude I saw, you could almost believe it. But he isn't completely emaciated or anything. He's not a walking skeleton. He does have to drink water, of course. But who wants to try that theory out? Not me, right? So what gives, if this guy from Coral Castle is correct, right? Which I think if you were to say photons are stored within biomatter, it'd be very difficult to deny that exact principle from matter that isn't considered organic, like the table, like this camera, right? Let me give you an analogy of how you might think about this. How many of you have been using a remote control at your house for 4 or 5 years, and for whatever reason the battery doesn't go dead? Maybe a couple of years. Most Logitech mice can go for 2.5, 3 years without having to replace either 2 AA's or a single AAA, depending on how it works, right? So you go fishing around in one of your drawers in the kitchen, in your little pantry, and you find a battery that you bought God knows when. It's still in the package, and there's 20 other ones in the package. You're not sure if it works. You pull out the old batteries and toss them, put these 2 new batteries in, quote unquote new, and I'll be damned, it works. Small footnote, 9-volt batteries seem to run themselves down without being used. It's really a bummer. I don't know why that is. You can't even trust buying them from the store. But you have this power cell that's sitting on a shelf doing nothing. It's a chemical reaction that's inside this thing. But you put it in the remote control, and all of a sudden something starts happening. The energy is drawn out of this battery, and it is put to use in a circuit. And the circuit's creating an RF wave to the television to control it. In a way, you gave the battery life. But the battery already existed with its power supply inside. But something better's going on. When you were a little kid in the 70s and 80s, we had toys that ran on D-cell batteries, big-ass D-cell batteries. For those of you who had big boom boxes back in the day, you know that those D batteries were real important. It gave life to a radio. The machine that is the human body is the remote control, in my opinion. The food that we ingest gets metabolized and broken down into what? Energy. Calorie energy. That's why processed food is horrible for you. It barely has any energy in it. Oh, sure, it'll convince your stomach you're full and you go to bed, but you didn't get any nutrients out of it. If you were to sustain yourself on fast food, we all know what happens, right? I think I told you that the story of the gentleman at my work who tried to give blood. He goes into convulsions inside the bus out in front of our company while I'm standing there waiting to give blood. My girlfriend's in front of me. She's freaking out. He is 6'3", gigantic guy, just absolutely in a seizure on the bed. When we went back into his cube, what was he ingesting as his primary food? Cup of noodle and Mountain Dew drink. The guy disappeared for, I think, around a month. Came back, all that crap was gone out of his cube, and it was all vegetables, meats, and I forgot what he was drinking, probably water or iced tea or something. But he had drained his body of what he needed to sustain life, and when he gave blood, he went over the edge. He depleted his body of the bare minimum he had managed to scrape off of whatever was keeping him alive, right? Luckily, the dude didn't die. Human beings, as you well know, being one yourself, we're an amazing creation. We are an amazing design, aren't we? I was thinking about it last night because, people misunderstand this. We give credit to a lot of animals. Animals are not dumb beings. They are living beings, and I believe they have souls of their own, although some religions can't handle that idea. But the brain of a dolphin is bigger than the brain of a human being in totality. But the part that's bigger is all their cerebellum stuff, where all their muscle memory is. Because they have to swim or die, right? Because they have to come up to the surface and take air. You have to swim constantly. Same thing with, a shark has to constantly swim, otherwise it sinks to the bottom. Now, a shark can continue breathing the gill-filtered water, but the dolphin has to get air. So does the whale. So even though their brains are bigger, the frontal lobes and all the parts that make man different are smaller than ours. Now, let's think about the stuff that we talk about on this particular show. I mean, we talk about some crazy stuff, right? And the comment sections, even more so. Think about any animal that you can name, and think about it contemplating what we contemplate. Think about a squid. It's pretty damn ingenious, right? It barely has any tissue that it claims to be a brain. Is it writing screenplays? Is it writing the next episode of Orwell? Is it coming up with some invention that theoretically could take us to the stars? Probably not, right? So the grand design of human, which is not perfect, it is perfect in perhaps that it holds consciousness and gives a soul sort of an infinite number of variations that we call life, right? If you kept coming back as a human being, You could have unbelievable lives. As long as the earth keeps changing and society keeps changing, there's probably not a possibility that you could ever repeat what you did before. You could never look the same. You just couldn't. Even if you kept pushing yourself into the bloodline that you came from, trying to hope and pray that somehow you're recreated. All the genes stack up correctly once again. As you contemplate who we are, usually the first experience you get is this amazing alienation, this amazing isolation. Oh my God, I know that I exist. I think, therefore I am, let's just say. But what the hell is that? There's no answers when you first contemplate that, because you don't have an overlaying ecosystem to explain what you are. And science doesn't help. Religion doesn't help, right? Think about why religions are spread into countries. There's only a few that are fanatical, and there's plenty of flavors in the United States of America, let me tell you, before you have to reach out to any foreign country. But you take a country that is brand new, it's been discovered. They don't really have much of a religion, but they're actually happy. And a foreign country wants to control that country. They know if you can indoctrinate those people to believe a particular religion, especially fear for their souls, eternity, and they have to go through band to get, flawed pedophilia men to get your salvation to God. Isn't that unbelievable, right? That you can control them. You can guilt trip them. You can mold them. But if you never inject those paradigms into man, the only other thing you got left is science. Quote unquote science, right? A separate religion that starts to break you down and make you feel insignificant. As Douglas Adams wrote in his book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, when one goes into the total perspective vortex, a machine that punishes you by showing you how insignificant you are in the universe, you see that you're an infinitely small dot on an infinitely small dot. Infinitely small. How ingenious was that guy to say, just knowing how insignificant you are in the universe is the greatest punishment you could ever endure as a human being. And only Zaphod Beeblebrox was able to go through it. But then again, he was in a false universe in Zonnie Woob's office, right? This biophoton theory, if you mix the two together, the biophotonic photographs are merely the physical proof that this is what's occurring. But the biophotonics science that says perhaps it is the ecosystem that keeps us healthy, that's the next stage up. And I would suggest in this episode, as many have suggested before me, it represents the bloodline of the universe. One could think of it as red blood cells that move around, although that's a rather slow medium. Or one could think of it as the conceivably infinitely quick electrical nervous system of the universe. What isn't clear about the universe is whether or not there are true delays in all mediums that comprise the universe. Now again, this is all theoretical in terms of what we theorize the universe to be made out of, right? But the one thing that man, and again, physics has polluted this horribly. Eric Dollard has shined a lot of, pardon the pun, a lot of light on this, is that the photon, light, is the fastest moving thing that we have identified as man. Now there's a lot of false claims that light travels at a single speed. All the universities of the world that have measured light have found varying, actually pretty decent variations in the speed of light. And we think that if there's any particle that goes faster than the speed of light, we simply can't track it. Save ether, which, again, Tesla and Faraday both tracked it 50 times the speed of light. Eric Dollard confirmed that at 11 years old in the military lab of RCA in the Navy. But Eric Dollard, in his retro research, reading books from, 100 years ago, surmised at the end of his journey, and he's still on his journey, that the starlight doesn't take any time to get to us. This notion that things are really far away and that we're seeing the past is all BS, according to his research. And let me tell you, this guy understands books that most of us would utterly struggle to complete a page with full understanding. For those who engage in the art of remote viewing, the claim is that there is no delay in time looking into the universe anywhere you want to look. Again, I'm still way on the sidelines of remote viewing. I just haven't seen enough proof that it works. I haven't met anyone who's actually claimed to have done it. I certainly haven't seen an experiment in front of my face. But when you think about consciousness, it is amazing how we illustrate consciousness in our brain. Now, I was going to create a separate episode on dreams, but I'm going to throw it in here because I think it matters, and I don't think I can do a whole hour on this idea. But I want you to contemplate this for a second. Here's your bonus inside this episode, okay? It is interesting how we are so sure of things, okay? For you atheists, hopefully your ears perk up a little bit if you're still there. It dawned on me the other day, because I study dreams like a maniac, okay? And just daydreams. Just daydreams when you're thinking about things in your head. If I said, get a piece of paper out, get your favorite writing utensil, whether that be a pencil or a pen, and I want you to get yourself in a dark room with a spotlight on the table so you can see what you're doing, but you have no other sensory input going on. And I want you to draw something that you might dream about on that piece of paper. And I want you to get everything right. When I say right, I mean not only the architectural issues going on, I want to get you to draw all the biological members of your dream, whether they be pets or insects or humans. Get all their anatomy correct. And then, to top it off, I want you to track all the light sources in your dream. If it's a sunny day, put that in your head and account for that in your drawing. If there's a lamp, any light coming from anywhere, I want you to ray trace, meaning you are to track every single photon in your brain and transcribe that onto the piece of paper 1,000% accurate. And what's the experiment here we're doing? Well, when I dream, I don't know about you, but I get it right in my dream every single time. If I so much as daydream, I can daydream a living room and anything you want me to put in there. Pink elephant, 20 gray aliens playing poker. I can see it in my head really quickly. To the degree I need to zoom in on something, let's say we're role playing and you say, okay, what does the alien look like? And I say, well, which part of it do you want me to describe? Give me the eye socket. What's that look like? Immediately my brain is going to make decisions about what that eyeball looks like. It's an almond black eye. I have to decide how much moisture it has. Does it have an eyelid? If it doesn't have an eyelid, is the eye getting dusty? What's it made out of? Does it reflect? Is it the deepest black in the world? Is it like looking into another dimension? But just the most average thing you dream about, when you dream, your brain is getting godlike things perfect. But aren't you just a human being? Right? If you have all this empirical knowledge about how light works and how architecture works and people work, how are you able to imagine riding an escalator down or up? And some of you might try to poo-poo this idea and say, yeah, dude, well, we've seen all this stuff in the real world. I think some of you know right away that you dream things you've never seen before. I've never seen King Kong chase me down a neighborhood, but I had that dream at 9 years old. It was a neighborhood just like this. It was in Derby, Kansas, as a kid, and I had this probably 25-foot King Kong chasing me because I just seen the movie on TV, and King Kong's way bigger than that in the movie. But he was destroying houses, and he wasn't necessarily coming after me, but I was stuck, with the fencing around the houses, and he was just tearing up houses, throwing telephone poles, just bashing in rooftops. I was 9. I had 9 years of life at that point. If you just want to take a clinical, atheist, scientific view of the development of a brain, and I was envisioning things I'd never seen before. I'd never seen a house get torn apart. I don't even think I've seen that in a movie at that point. But I had no problem dreaming it. When I was 4 years old, I would dream of all the toys in my room coming at me on the ground. Like I was dark, and they were all just kind of marching towards me. I hadn't seen Close Encounters yet either. So how's that possible? How's it possible that we have access to create at a second's notice a fantasy, a vision? I think it's because we are absolutely 100% homogeneous with the universe itself. Not just its mass, okay? We have carrier waves that travel this universe seemingly at inexhaustible speeds. Now, again, we've said on this show, and the episode especially, Does Space Exist?, that we don't dream of being in space. A couple people said they have. But there is a question. Can you dream about things you've never seen before? I haven't personally dreamed of being in Asia. Even though I was born in Europe, I can't say I've dreamed of, a Tudor neighborhood. I haven't dreamed of the Eiffel Tower or Big Ben. I've seen them in real life, but I don't dream of them for some reason. It could be a localized frequency, right? I dream the average mean frequency that is going through the human bodies that are in my area, right? For those that you are politically minded, most of you have had a friend move from, say, a conservative area to a quote-unquote more liberal area, and it just takes about a decade before that person starts to become like the people that are up there, very liberal. The reverse happens. Big city people move to the Midwest all the time. They start to enjoy the simpler life, the slower pace. All their value systems switch to the value systems of those of which are there. But there are some people that move in these drastic changes, and they can't get out the visions in their mind of where they're from, and they don't like where they are now, which is in one of the opposite polarities of where they grew up. And it's their power to envision and remember what it was like that keeps them against wherever they are, right? So what does this all come down to? What is the summation at the end of this episode? I want to throw this very simple idea at you, which a lot of you have probably already conceived of, which is the following. What if photons are life? What if a photon is more than just some light-emitting verb? What if it is actually staring at pure consciousness? Like I said in an episode not too long ago, we know that there's individuals that call themselves the illuminated. Tons of sun worship. When you start looking up theories of light, even in scientific communities, you will see the word Luciferian. Now, for those of you who are religious, you're starting to get Beelzebub and Satan views in your mind. I definitely have watched videos on YouTube where someone is going on for an hour plus trying to demonize the sun as the devil, this bright thing that's shining on me right now. Isn't that interesting? What's interesting about the individuals that really get religious about this kind of thing is that they'll tell you, not many people demonize the sun that I've ever seen, but they do call it Lucifer. Some groups call it Lucifer, okay? It's illuminating. It's Luciferian. I'm not quite sure where all that comes together. But they'll also tell you that those that are evil will invert symbolism. What is good is bad, and what is bad is good. Well, why would they suddenly straighten out their theory with the sun, as they deem it to be some demonistic thing, and you believe it? You demonize the thing that you need the most. If you talk to the average soccer mom, and there's plenty of soccer dads out there too, and you say, well, your kid wants to play on the beach, what should your child bring? Man, it's going to be like, sunscreen 32 or 45 or whatever, the highest number you can get. And they just cream your kid in toxic chemicals. And then the sun hits it, and according to research, it toxifies. Boom. You got some good old skin cancer on you. But if nothing else, forget the toxification of the cream. Don't totally forget it, but put that aside for just a moment. If you need sun rays in order to stay healthy, and you constantly shower yourself in this stuff, and anytime you get in the sun, you block it, you may not be the most healthy individual. Now, there are some cultures that have shielded themselves from the sun for thousands of years, but there's a difference between putting a chemical barrier on your flesh and literally blocking the sun's photons from really doing what they do, and simply diverting it from direct skin contact because your race believes that being as white as a sheet is sexy. You're still getting hit by the photons, right? It still wiggles through your fabrics, and maybe it doesn't give you a sunburn necessarily because it doesn't have enough concentration, but you're still getting the agitation that you need. And perhaps, if we're right in this episode to any degree about it being the carrier wave of consciousness, you get that too. Think about the difference between working for yourself and working in corporate America, or corporate anything, corporate Europe, whatever. What's the general difference between working for a company and working for yourself? For those of you who've worked for yourself, you might know the answer right away. For those of you who've always worked for a corporation, let me get you hip to something here real quick. The average person who is self-employed gets a lot more exposure to the outdoors than folks that work for corporations. Your construction worker, aren't they more burly people? They stay healthy and they can, build a house. They can lift heavy objects. They just seem to stay healthy. But when you work for a corporation, you go inside a building, don't you? Completely shielded from the sun. And you get sick. And you might blame just the proximity of other people that are sick, and there's probably a lot of truth to that. But if your immune system has to function to keep you healthy, then maybe getting a little sun is part of your diet that you're missing. There's all this talk about, and I've done an episode on the moon, and the fact that there's a very interesting anomaly that we have a moon that when in the sky and in front of the sun, it is the same size as the sun. And if there's anything astronomically against in this universe that you could put your finger on that says this is sort of so fantastic that you can't believe it's true without absolute intent by our designers, it would be the fact that our moon is too big to be around our planet, for one, and that when it blocks the sun, it creates an eclipse because it is so absolutely the exact freaking size of the sun. Some people have done the experiment where moonlight is cooler. It cools, basically, and the sun heats up. And so there's a lot of additional theories to the moon. Now, sometimes the moon's not out, sometimes the sun's not out, both at the same time. It's a black night. The moon is completely waned out of existence for a particular night. How many of you have contemplated that the sun could be God? And you look at the stars and you're like, hey, come on, man, there's a bunch of stars out there, and I've seen Star Trek. I mean, Star Trek's real, right? And all those other little specks out there are suns. Well, I don't know, right? We have a viewer, Dave, that films stars with his camera, his super zoom, 600 zoom camera, I think, right? And boy, these things sure look different out there than our sun. They seem to rotate. They seem to have a center, a nucleus. For those of you who study martial arts, either Kung Fu, which is usually the pinnacle example of this, the Shaolin monks? I'm saying that wrong, but Shaolin monks. They have these procedures that they use before they do moves, where they swoop their arms through the air. And they swoop their arms and they draw it towards their chest in most cases. And when I saw this as a young kid, I thought, man, what is this? Is this some weird dance they're doing? Is it some coordination primer or something like that? I'm sure it has all the effects of that. But when you ask them, they say, no, we are gathering chi within our body such that we have this temporary archive of energy, storage like a battery. And so that when we fight, we actually move the chi out through our hands, through our feet, through our body. And when we strike, it's more powerful than if we hadn't done this. You might try this experiment if you're, whether or not you're into meditation or not. I do this from time to time, and it'll give me shivers. It's crazy. If you sit down and you, again, stop thinking of yourself as the human body. Think of yourself as the soul that's in this vessel. And from the top of your head, just envision, almost like a Van Allen belt, just envision the energy and information and consciousness of the universe just siphoning and filtering into your head and going all the way through your glands, right? All the glands down your spine, right? Go see chakra maps if you need to know where these things are. And then it'll pretty much exit out the bottom of your body. You do that for, I would say, it takes me less than 5 seconds to do it before I will get this shiver. And it's a euphoric shiver. For any of you who've climaxed in your life, it's the little tremble after the climax. It's the same exact feeling. At will, you can do this. You could be sitting at work with the headset on, listening to this podcast, and you just do that and just see, to the degree you should actually physically feel it. It'll start tingling in your system a little bit, and you'll feel it go through your system. And it's very interesting that I don't have this if I don't concentrate on it. As if you have to draw it into your system. Now, for those who are religious, they might say it's the Holy Spirit or something. It might be the same thing. Pure truth consciousness. To ingest the mathematical algorithms and realities out of this universe into your body, you are ingesting truth. Trust me. You can't ingest anything out of the universe but truth, because that's what it's made out of. Now, before I close, I just want to throw this little reminder out there. When I did an episode on electrical universe, might be an interesting episode to listen to after this, because I wasn't hip to this concept when I made that episode. But when I talk about the fact that the sun has a plasma core, so does the earth, so does the moon, so does every celestial body that we have discovered, okay? That's an energy core, super duper concentrated energy core. The plasma energy is, again, your stem cell energy in the universe. It hasn't decided what it's going to be because it hasn't slowed down enough to get a designation by man to be a hydrogen atom, a helium atom, carbon atom, light itself, a photon. If you can see plasma energy, it's because the veneer of the plasma is transposed into a thermalized photonic shell. But a lot of times when we see plasma energy, it looks like a mirror because it is reflecting everything off of it. Because it's like, you can't come in here because you've decided what to be. I haven't. You can't commingle plasma and normal energy truly in the same place, as I understand it. For any viewer that's ever seen ball lightning, it's said to be nothing more than a little bit of plasma energy either being created in an electrical storm or freed from the bowels of the earth through cracks in the rocks, which is why you see ball lightning in deserts shoot up out of the ground and go up into the sky. It's why I believe we see a series of lights in the desert sometimes. So just keep all that in mind. Start to think of the universe perhaps as a beautiful, homogeneous energy that is simply flowing through absolutely everything. We are something incredibly fortunate that we somehow have consciousness within all this inanimate mass. And again, dreams are not these cutouts of things that you've seen. Right? If dreams are merely a bunch of composited cutouts of things that you'd seen in your life, one, you'd never be able to dream of anything you hadn't seen. And two, it wouldn't look right? The light casting on the dashboard of your Lamborghini in your dream would be different than the light casting on the street from the light pole, because that's got a different light source that you saw a long time ago, and this one has a different one. But it's not that way, is it? It's perfect. As delusional as it might be, as renewing as it might be from second to second, the seconds that you see are photoreal in most cases. If you dream like I do, which I think you do. If you haven't gone to deepthoughtsradio.com, please do. All the feeds are there: video, audio, locked Facebook group, and Patreon. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.